Washington Post reported that new NASA data show that most, 21 out of the 37 largest world aquifers, are not replenishing themselves. Where is all the fresh water going?
My name is Dewayne Whitehead. I've been teaching for these floors for the last 18 years. Topics having to do with cultural anthropology. I know a lot about sociology, and the sociology of cities and that sort of thing leaves me cold. But cultural anthropology is about people. Where they came from, why they went there, and what they have done, how they built civilizations, and problems associated with people at various parts of the world at various times. So, in anthropological terms, put together, of course, on people, Homo sapiens, and water. How important it is to life, how important it is to where these civilizations arose, always on river basins. The word is everybody's running out of drinking water. Well, when you look at the way fresh water is used, and it's only about 3% of the total water available on Earth, and you consider that half of that is wasted, that conservation is the biggest source of water. And then there are other technologies such as desalination, a number of technologies, and that's getting very cheap. So that you can have desalinated water now with the new technologies for very low cost, although we will start appreciating, respecting water when water costs us some money. When it's free, people waste it. And it's not just Americans, they're doing it all over the world. That when you transport water for long distances, like electricity, up to 50% of it is wasted. Well, if we can recover the wasted water, fresh water, then we just have to worry about different problems, civilization problems of the world. There are different societal problems in getting fresh water to Africans, to some Indians, and to Chinese and so on. And those are societal problems, that the water is there, and we can get cheap water to those people, but that doesn't keep dictators and bad government from keeping people from appreciating such things as water that you can't live without. I always have a bibliography of books, and some of my courses are primarily from the written word books. Subjects such as water, there is so much new information, new technology that is breaking into the news every year that you can't just teach from books, because books are cover an area maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the past. And they're not going to reflect reality in such a hot topic as our relationship with water. So in this case, although I had 4 books, all bestsellers on water, and none of them more than 2 years old, one of my students says, well, your course doesn't follow the progression in any one of these books. And I said, no, it does not. I said they are interesting background, and I read them all, but every feature aspect that I thought was worth including in a lecture, I went to the internet and got the best sources of information, and some of these were absolutely current, and you need to be current on something like the topic I am just now teaching.
Homo sapiens and water, Part 3, Qanats. In the 1,000 years before the Common Era, the definitive civilization was the Persian Empire. Because much of it was located in the mountains or desert areas, Persians had an intimate relationship with water. To the north of the Persian Empire, much of the surface waters were salt water. The fresh water came from rivers that flowed from the north to the south, and the civilization of the Mesopotamia developed in the land between the rivers. Here, water management efforts resulted in flood irrigation for crops. To the east, on the west bank of the Indus River, there were precious few rivers, but there was snowmelt in the northern mountains. In Western history, these lands were called Persian because the early capital was named Persepolis. But centuries before, a people called Iranians migrated there from the northwest, maybe when the Black Sea flooded in 5600 BCE. Now most historians properly call it Iran. About 4,000 years ago, there were enough people dispersed around dry lands west of the Indus that some creative thinking brought about a system for getting the cold, fresh water from snowmelt in the Caucasus Mountains into villages and their fields, hundreds of miles from the mountains. They dug underground channels called Qanats. With luck, nature will have collected the underground flow towards a central exit point. That was called an alluvial fan. Sometimes men would tap separate springs that are close to one another and bring their flows to a central collection point, which is where the Qanat starts its downward path. From this alluvial debris of rocks, sand, and gravel, there will be pockets saturated with water and oozing out to form a brook. That spot, or area, is the ideal for the Qanats. Today we refer to engineering principles to explain the flow of water in a Qanat, but to the ancient Iranians, it was probably just common sense. First they would find a spring in the alluvial rocks at the base of the mountain where snowmelt is oozing out into a brook. Then spot where they wanted the water to flow for people or irrigation. Then, finally, they would dig a tunnel up towards the source, sloping 1 foot to 1,000 feet in rise. Every 30 to 40 yards, they dug an access hole to the surface to get rid of debris and let air in. This is a Qanat tapping an aquifer. Having the source so near the mountains assures a reliable flow of water. Some Qanats have flowed for 1,000 years. To build a Qanat, one needs to know where the source of water is and where it's going to end up. A degree of practical engineering ability is simple but vital. Usually one starts at the intended end and works uphill. Solid rock, alluvial till, and porous sand and gravel will be encountered and must be removed in a tunnel that is about 3 feet wide and 5 feet high. A misreading of soil conditions could lead to a collapse, resulting in expensive repairs and sometimes death for the workers. The workers were highly paid and were generational, as in mining. One man would dig, another would haul material to the shaft in leather bags, where a man at a pulley on the surface would remove the bag and another man scatter the fill over the surrounding area. Qanats influenced settlement and farming. The best water was right at the point of emergence, so people with clout built there and water was channeled to their property. The village formed on the downside of the best water residences, followed by agricultural irrigation. With multiple Qanats, one had the basis for a city. Rich people would have their own reservoir or an abanar, and downstream there would be public abanars where people would fill their leather bags and pots with water to carry home. The number and character of neighborhoods would indicate the number of Qanats in the village or city. If the Qanats entered the community from the north, and the most wealthy got to build near the mouth of the flow, getting the cleanest and coolest water, the north side would be the most affluent, some with their own abanars. And somewhere after that, the poor would get the lowest quality. And then the water would flow to the agricultural areas. Presumably, there would be a kind of middle class between the rich and the poor residential areas. For centuries, the position of Qanats determined the position of wealth and influence. The channels would have to be cleaned of silt and other contamination at regular intervals. This is drinking and cooking water and must be kept sparkling clear even after being transported, in some cases more than 100 miles underground. There would be no evaporation and it will stay cooled. Every 30 to 40 yards, a vertical shaft would be dug for dirt removal, future repairs, and fresh air for present and future workers. The removed material would be piled around the hole like a cone to minimize the contamination from wind-blown contaminants at the surface. The slope of the Qanat must be just enough for the water to flow, yet shallow enough to prevent a damaging currents. Lining will be solid rock or baked terracotta sections carefully fitted together and sealed with mortar. Qanats are generally earthquake-proof. Most Qanats in Iran are less than 5 kilometers, but some have been measured at 7 kilometers. The vertical shafts range from 20 to 275 meters. The deeper shafts require wider openings and intermediate platforms for removal of soil and maintenance. Construction speed depends upon the nature of the land. Solid rock must be hacked out, or porous sand must be bridged with fired terracotta pipes. Without rock, a 4-man team can excavate 40 meters a day. When the vertical shaft reaches 40 meters, they can only excavate 20 meters a day, and when the vertical shaft is 60 meters, only 5 meters a day. Deep, long Qanats can take years or even decades to build. The building of Qanats is expensive and can be expensive to maintain, but some have lasted 3,000 years and have solved the perennial problem of getting water from its source to where it's needed. Because of both cost and need, a community may fund the work, or a group of people, such as farmers, may contribute and have a share in the ownership and water. In imperial times, the emperor would have Qanats built like roads as a necessary part of the infrastructure of the city. The city streets and roads would often parallel the Qanats. In Tehran and other cities, Qanats delivered most of the drinking water through much of the 20th century. The rush to urbanization has led to haphazard city planning, and many Qanats have been destroyed. Water is now supplied by pumping from deep aquifers. Each year, the deep wells have to be extended to go deeper to get the fossil water laid down millions of years ago. Recharging deep aquifers is a new technology. From the surface, there is no mistaking where the Qanats have been built. This sketch shows the distribution of water from a reservoir out to other customers, businesses, or private homes. Qanats used in conjunction with wind towers can provide cooling as well as a water supply. Wind towers built above Qanats have provided sustainable building cooling in desert climates for well over 1,000 years. Because of the mountain source of the water, unlike wells, the flow has been reliable for hundreds or even thousands of years. A wind tower is a chimney-like structure positioned above a house. Of its 4 openings, the one opposite the wind direction is open to move air out of the house. That air is replaced by cooler air coming from the Qanat below, which could be 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit if close to the mountain source. The airflow across the vertical shaft opening in the wind catcher creates lower pressure and draws cool air up from the Qanat tunnel, mixing with it. Because the air in the Qanat enters at some distance away, it is cooled by the cold walls as well as the cool water, as well as the latent heat of evaporation as water evaporates into the airstream. In dry desert climates, This can result in greater than 15% reduction in the inside air temperature. The mixed air still feels dry and the basement cool. These systems have been used for more than 1,000 years. At least 2,000 years ago, the Persians made and kept ice in this system. The walls were up to 3 meters thick. Packed in straw, the ice would suffer a 20% loss by midsummer. Storage was deep. Mud brick walls up to 3 meters thick kept out the heat. The towers are wind towers for air conditioning. 4 towers indicate 4 separate Qanats coming through this reservoir. Newer models were used through the middle of the 20th century. They also kept perishable foods from spoiling. More than 2,000 years ago, the Persians had learned how to make ice in the winter and store it for summer use in the desert. In winter, water would be placed in wooden containers outside this north-facing wall. Shaded from the sun, it would freeze at night and then be taken inside. Here we see the north wall of an ice house. Air-conditioned Abanar public water source, and maybe ice storage in modern Iran. Some have been preserved and maintained as historical treasures. The Bishop of Barcelona's palace was once the home of the Sultan of Moorish Spain. The building was air-conditioned by wind catchers. It was once part of the outer defense wall. Christians made a hole in the wall to build the cathedral. The bishop's palace is right next door. In Barcelona, the Sultan's bishop's residence, the 3 truncated towers were originally wind catchers for air conditioning. Alexander the Great burned Persepolis out of spite in 330 before the Common Era.
To send a message to the billionaire class. You can't have it all.
I'm running for president of the United States because we have 4 beautiful kids and 7 incredible grandchildren. And I want to make sure that the country we leave them is a nation that we are proud of. My mother was born and raised in New York City. She died at the age of 46. We had a 3.5-room rent-controlled apartment. At that very early age, I think I began to realize the impact that lack of finances have on families. My father came to this country from Poland at the age of 17, worked every day of his life. I grew up in Brooklyn. Many of the families were immigrants, and they understood the importance of education. We don't have a strong economy unless we have a very well-educated workforce.
That is why I, as president, will fight to make tuition in public colleges and universities free and at substantially lower interest rates and student loans.
At the University of Chicago, I got involved in the civil rights movement. We ended up engaging in a sit-in demonstration. I believe that you're entitled to justice and to equal rights, whether you're black, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're gay, whether you're transgender. You are a human being. I went to Washington to demonstrate. We went out there on the mall. It was an extraordinary speech. I had the feeling that I was, at that particular moment, part of history. I ended up winning my first election as mayor of Burlington by 10 votes after a recount in an election that nobody thought we could win. I met Jane just about the time of the election. We have been together for 27 years.
As president, I will defend the station, but I will do it responsibly.
I had serious doubts about what Bush and Cheney were telling us. And if you overthrew Saddam Hussein, you could bring a massive amount of instability into that region, and that it would not be quite as easy as people like Donald Rumsfeld and others were telling us. We have got to, as a moral responsibility, provide the best quality health care to men and women who put their lives on the line to defend us. John McCain and I put $5 billion into strengthening the VA so that any veteran who walks into a VA facility will get quality care in a timely manner. That was one of the major pieces of legislation passed in the last congressional session. I don't want to see people not go to the doctor when they're sick because they can't afford to pay the doctor's fees.
The United States must join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all as a right.
Nothing is closer to my heart as someone who has kids besides the issue of global warming.
There is nothing more important than leaving this country and our entire planet habitable for our kids and our grandchildren. Climate change is real. It is caused by human activity, and we have a small window of opportunity to transform our energy system, cut carbon emission, and move in a very different direction. This campaign is about putting Americans back to work at decent paying jobs. Let's get started. Let's put $1 trillion over a 5-year period. Let's create and maintain 13 million jobs. Let's make our infrastructure stronger, safer, more efficient.
We must establish pay equity for women workers.
Bottom line is that if somebody works in this country for 40 hours a week, that person should not be living in poverty.
The issue of wealth and income inequality is the great moral issue of our time. It is the great economic issue of our time. It is the great political issue of our time. This type of rigged economy is not what America is supposed to be about. This has got to change. And as your president, together, we are going to change it.
We will be working hard to overturn citizenship. That is the undermining of American democracy and the qualities of this country which have made us the envy of the entire world. Today in America, we have enormous problems. They are solvable